This is Making Better Decisions. I'm your host, Ryan Sullivan. Decisions are where rubber meets the road for organizations. Each week, we'll be learning from people who are on the front lines of turning raw data into better outcomes for their organizations. This show is sponsored by Canopy Analytic, helping companies make better decisions using data. Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Making Better Decisions podcast. Today's guest got his bachelor's of science in marketing and then started a career as a marketer at Dun & Bradstreet, then worked in financial analysis, HR, and then into systems, IT, and data. He's worked for other big names such as L'Oreal, KPMG, Oracle, and AIG. Please welcome Senior Director of Data and Analytics at ReWorld Waste, Charles Link. Welcome to the show, Charles.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
What is one thing you wish more people knew about using data to make better decisions?
I think the one thing I wish more people knew, or at least understood up front, is that when the data is being created, it's created for a specific purpose. And just because it sounds like it's suitable doesn't mean it is.
Say more about data being created for a purpose.
So I'll give you an example. When somebody's putting in, say, new customers, and their job is just to get the customer data entered. And so they'll put in whatever it takes to close out that record. But there's
Mm,
somebody, say, 5 steps downstream who's doing contract administration for that new customer. And if for some reason that just to get the customer in, if they were missing a field, say a birth date, and they didn't put it in, but the contract administration needs that birth date on that customer, you know, and it's missing, people might start doing analytics with dummy data such as 1/1900 that may skew your data and make it look like your average customer is over 100 years old. So things get a little wacky when it's not understood. But just because they said, yes, we have customer, they thought in their mind what customer entailed meant all the fields, all the quality in place, good to go. And that happens more often than not, even in cases where the data definitions are not well understood. And
mm.
people will assume that two measurements of theoretically the same metric are the same, and they're not. It happens all the time. So it's important to have those discussions up front when you're starting a project or an initiative with the data creators, who are generally the owners, as
Mhm.
well as the stakeholders who are going to be consuming that, to make sure that what they think they're buying is what they're buying.
This is a problem that I think is everywhere for
Yeah.
folks that are dealing with any type of manually entered data. Talk to me a little bit about how an organization can best balance. Let's take your example for a second, right? So you have a salesperson that has to like plug in a couple of these numbers and whatever, and down the road, the value is there for the organization. But for that salesperson, they're told to get out there and close. And so there's, in that example, kind of this balance between sales friction and then down the road having really clean data. How can an organization balance that and train people and get the outcomes they're looking for?
So one of the things that's important is to look at everything as a matter of process. Don't think of it as an IT project, a data project. Think
Mm,
of what is the business process and what are the connecting processes that enables. And if we look at the data points, think of data as the blood cells that flow through the veins of those processes. And when you are having any sort of an initiative, upfront before you get into any technical discussions, if you understand from whence the data came, who got you that data, and start walking back upstream to the point it's actually created as part of your requirements gathering, or whether you're using user stories, whatever methodology you prefer. But when you're having those requirements discussions, you need to make those two business constituents, the stakeholder who owns their process and the creator who owns their process, have that discussion, looking at some sample data and say, this is what I plan to do. Is this suitable? Now,
mm.
sometimes you can work it out. Sometimes they'll say, yes, I will change my process to ensure that this happens. Other times they say, I won't get to it for a while. Other times they say you're out of luck and you have to come up with some other mitigating factor, but at least you go in eyes wide open as to what your situation is before you start building things. Because the one thing you don't want to do is try to write all kinds of code that loops around and hops and tries to figure out how to fill in the gaps. I mean,
Mm,
obviously, there's some cases where you can. All states have to be uppercase. Okay, fine. Just make an uppercase statement. No big deal. But there are other times when there's just clearly that data is not there. It's not going to be there. So now what are you going to do? And how are you going to handle it? But if you know that, then you can say, okay, maybe and I'll use my birthday example. If the birthday is makes the person look like they are, beyond some reasonable age, just say puts the person as greater than 85 years old. They plugged in a 1900 or something, automatically kick those people out onto a list before they poison the rest of the processes downstream and send them back to whomever is accountable for getting that data and get it, or give it to a group that will go get it, saying,
mm,
okay, I'm sorry, thank you, welcome to our company. We need to fill in some missing information to, complete your contract or something to that effect. And it's not just human entered data, it's misunderstandings of even the machine data. In industrial world, the IoT has these fields are called tags. And
mhm.
steam pressure, for example, is not always steam pressure. It depends on where it was measured as to what it means and what its impact is. But if somebody doesn't have that understanding to differentiate what those two things are, they'll have the same name, but because they're measured in two different facilities, one was measured at point A, one was measured at point B, and they don't really measure the same thing. And that's where it's very important that as part of that requirements gathering, with the process orientation, that you also record all of that in some sort of a data dictionary or data glossary to be very specific, to give things very concrete names. Say, okay, well, from now on, we will call this as head pressure steam, and this is, pipe pressure steam, or something to that effect. You have to get very concrete so that you can, over time, whittle down those misunderstandings, or at least have one place to say, no, you misunderstood. This is the official definition.
I like the point that you made there about the solution very frequently comes back to having a conversation with the people who are involved and explaining why something's valuable. I think it is a bit of an assumption, but if we make the assumption that everybody at the organization wants the best for the organization, wants everybody on the team to succeed, which I think is the right assumption to make. That's really what it comes down to. Is when we talk, in your birthday example, we talk to that salesperson, we say, "Hey, here is why this is important for the business. This is going to generate more follow on and, more residual bonus for you or, whatever the case
Yeah.
may be." If we can explain the value to the business, that's usually where it comes in. I think one
Yeah.
of the things that I have had very clearly refined for me running this podcast is just how human and counterintuitively non-technical this field is, right?
Yeah.
Like, obviously, the tech matters a ton, but just as you mentioned, it really comes down to, like, what are the business's goals? What are the processes that are involved? And who are the human beings, and what are their incentives that are involved with those processes? And if we nail those, tech almost takes second seat. I won't say back seat, but it's not quite first.
Yeah. You should be able to rely on your technology to just do what it does, like you would rely on your plumbing or your electricity. It should just work. The
Mm,
the real magic is going to be in those communications. The advent of all this advanced technology, artificial intelligence, etc., only highlights and re-emphasizes the criticality of human communication
yeah.
to understand and resolve issues.
I think it also highlights a point, which is, forgive me for being a little bit glib, but like, business is hard. Um, and I think that data and tech, and now, I'm sure we're all seeing this with the AI trend right now. I don't think there is any silver bullet. Whatever we build, whatever we use, there is still always going to be continuous interaction and management and development and improvement.
Mhm.
One of the things that you mentioned an answer or two ago was the idea of, a data glossary, data dictionary. There's a lot of different terms for this idea. And I want to dig in a little bit deeper on that. One of the things that I have found about this concept is that if done perfectly is a massive benefit to the organization. Folks who are looking for the data can understand it, they know where to find it, they know where it comes from.
Mhm.
Hopefully you have, hey, who's the subject matter expert if I have a question about this that I can go to? So you have these named positions of responsibility, you have information about data lineage, we have, governance standards, all of this wonderful stuff. One of the challenges that I have experienced in implementing this strategically with a lot of organizations is the balance between the perfection of a data dictionary or something like that, and then the trade off, right? So, whatever person I have writing, entering, updating information there is a person that is not spending their time generating new analytics or something like that. So I find that a lot of organizations struggle to effectively balance the resource allocation and the not always immediately tangible return on investment of this. But it's something that I also see the value in. Talk to me a little bit about how you would balance that.
So there's a couple of things. You mentioned if implemented perfectly. I'm going to say if implemented at all, it has massive benefits.
Yeah, sure.
We've done a decent job here. We are far from perfect, but it has massive benefits. The way we got around the resource constraint is that since we do that SIPOC process approach to identifying what the data points are where yeah, that are needed for to support those initiatives, the business analysts record what they've learned in those sessions in the data catalog as opposed to writing it down in a Word document.
Mm,
And it's not changing how much they do, it's changing how they do it. And
yeah,
that's really how to keep on top of it. And it doesn't start off like, okay, well, we just went in and we loaded everything we knew and we started with that. It started with one project at a time. And we found that, and this has just been my general experience across the board, that no matter what process, I'm going to say 80% of data points have an overlapping need by the business.
sure.
And so once you start getting through them, you get a compound return on your investment because when the conversation comes up and says, well, what do you mean by CO2 emissions? We go back to, well, this last project, it was defined as this. These are the stewards. This is where it was coming from. Okay, that's eye opening. We're going to tweak that a little bit. Or B, thanks for letting us know, but we also need something else in there. And we start to add on it. And then every project that follows on that has a little less new stuff to be entered. And what you'll find is that rather than trying to boil the ocean with every term you might need, you focus on the ones that are actually tied to where your business is going
Mm,
and what its current initiatives are. Because why would there be a business initiative? And I say business initiative, not technology initiative. Why would there be a business initiative if it wasn't important? Why would the business put money into that? Therefore, it must be valuable to do it right. And
yeah.
it becomes more of a business analysis activity than a technical activity or some sort of overbearing governance that's draining your resources.
Yeah, you kinda just slam dunked on a couple of my follow-ons there. I think that you couldn't be more right, and in fact, I think this is an idea that is more generally applicable than just talking about a data dictionary.
Mhm.
So, I think the exact same thing holds true for, building the grand data warehouse in the sky where everything is that, or, "Hey, we're doing reporting now," and it's like, "Okay, well, you kinda always have been. You're answering questions now. It's just like, let's maybe change one piece at a time how we get there." I absolutely love and couldn't agree more with this idea. It's not like, "Hey, let's eat the elephant all at once," to use,
Yeah.
a jaded business analogy, right? It's just one bite at a time. What is the thing that is going to generate business impact quickest and largest? And we focus there and we just keep on churning. Exactly as you said. Hopefully, we're not engaging in initiatives that are either done out of, I'll say, like, technological vanity. Like, as a technologist, I know that there are lots of times where I'm like, "Oh, this is really cool," or like, "Oh, it's so elegant," or "It's simple," or and it's like, "Okay, but where's the business impact?" And so
Yeah,
long as we make our decisions on what to invest in based on that business impact, then the follow on of like, "Oh, well, how do we bet?" It's like, "Well, it's important, so we do what's important, and then
yeah.
we don't do what's not." I love that answer.
The other thing that I think is important, just in the same vein, is that I had seen data programs that were stood up with the promise of blue skies tomorrow. In
Mhm.
5 years, you pump all this money in, and all these wonderful things were going to happen. And I watched that approach fail hard.
Yeah.
Because I sat down as we were going through some transitions at AIG with some of our business leaders who were sitting in these governance councils. They say, it's great that we've got these improving DMM scores and everything looks great and all these things are coming, but nothing in my life has changed. I said, well, wait a minute, this isn't right. We're not doing this right. We're focused on the technology and the capability, not the delivery of that. And so I kind of dreamed up this what I call data supply chain management model. And
Mhm.
the way things work are that we have a vision of where we want to be strategically with our data program, our data and analytics program.
Sure.
And we have a vision there, but rather than asking for a big technology investment up front, because we don't necessarily know what's going to be this year, next year, and where the business is going to go, instead we say, okay, we're going to have a set of standards and procedures that we're going to operate, and they will evolve over time. But for now, this is how we do things. We're going to go to the business and say, okay, what do you need that involves data or analytics, which is almost everything? And what are you trying to do? What are you trying to measure? And that project, whatever investment, we put down, I like to think of it as cobblestones on the road for that one project, and we take a couple steps forward. And each one of those things takes you a little bit further down the road. And people always say, well, that, did what changed? How have we gotten towards our strategic end? And every year I do a turn around. I say, turn around and look backwards. And you say, wait, we've been walking down the road the whole time. I said, right. It shouldn't wreck your business. It should make it easier for you. You should
Mm.
get what you need out of this. At the same time, we are evolving and maturing slowly to a more mature state. It's going to be a journey, not a destination, because you are never truly done. And also, if the business needs to take a direction, a detour, if you're only laying down a few cobblestones at a time, you change the direction in which you're laying those cobblestones. There's no effort wasted. You still made progress as you go around your various obstacles. So it's that over time, it's how you deliver a business initiative, not a separate investment in and of itself. There are some smaller things that get done as foundational or maybe discovery skunk work type things, but the vast majority of my most successful contributions to my data programs have been strictly a business initiative done the right way with an eye on who else could benefit from this and how does this mature the data program. That's how it works.
Yeah. One of the things that, for any longtime listeners to the podcast, they're probably tired of this idea. I'm sorry. I harp on it because I think it's one of the most important things in this space is data, and all of the technology that we use to interact with data are just tools for achieving business objectives. It is not a separate thing. We don't like go off in a silo and just like build data things for data reasons and
Yeah.
make money off of it. Unless, of course, you're a data company. And then again, now it's right back to being
Yeah.
a business objective. So it really, really behooves any data professional to fundamentally understand their business, understand their specific company's goals within their market, and then use the tools and the skills that are at their disposal to help move that forward. Otherwise, we're just wasting money.
Yeah. And it's also sometimes I find my business partners, they love to glom on to the tools as
Yeah.
names of things to do as opposed to their objective, and I always try to bring them back to reality saying, "Look, it doesn't matter what reporting tool we're talking about. So let's just leave the brands off the table.
Yeah.
You need to do X and this is why. But because it's something that's tangible and also shifts some of the accountability onto IT saying, well, it's this tool's fault, it's that tool's fault. So no, no, let's leave the tools out. Let's not talk tools. And let's just no more than we're going to talk about the electrical lines in your house when you're putting in a new television. It has no difference. So let's just talk. You need a new TV. We put in a TV there, and getting them off that way of thinking is important as well.
Your career has spanned companies that are in a lot of different industries.
Yeah,
However, prior to getting into kind of data management at large, you had a heavy focus on people management, particularly the software platforms that enable people management. I haven't had anybody on that has that experience. And one of the things that I do love to do with a guest is talk a little bit about some of the specifics from that niche. The data that we collect on people and how we use data to increase everybody's capabilities to see where we're at with, compliance or whatever the case may be. I was wondering if you can give us a picture inside the world of data within people management.
sure. I think one of the things that the most educational for me in being in that space at all is it gave me a quick understanding of how sensitive data can be,
Mm,
how it should be secured. Especially when you're talking about people, all of a sudden you're talking about compensation, you're talking about payroll, you're talking about social security numbers. So right there, you get a real quick education on this is serious. Don't take it lightly. And, you're going to see stuff and you learn to keep your mouth shut.
mm,
You just don't talk, you know? But I think the other thing was that in that people space, it gave me a great understanding of with the right with the right core of data and the right supplemental attributes of data, you can do much more than you could otherwise. And I'll give you an example. At the law firm, we had an HR system and I ran that and built out the customizations. But we really got into talent management and it's a
mm,
law firm. And ultimately, what that led to is because we decided to not just manage the core of the payroll, but start looking at what languages do people speak? What skills do they have? What areas of law do they practice in? You start talking about their competency management. That becomes something that you can bring forward as a searchable criteria on a website that lets people help find attorneys. I need an attorney who's a litigator with automotive experience who speaks Polish. Well, try doing that. But if you do, if you have that data and you start doing competency management, then you can do much more to actually turn your, your people data into a monetized asset that generates revenue. And it's not just people data. Once you get that mindset saying, "Hey, wait a minute. This isn't just a database. This is a way to find opportunity. This is a way to help make doing business with us easier." So it doesn't matter whether it's people data anymore. But it did give me that appreciation because there's very little on this planet. And I love AI and computers and everything else, but there's very little more interesting than people. I mean, people have an infinite number of dimensions, and there's so many people that finding out how to relate and connect you know, and turn those people into even more effective resources is something I really got out of that space.
yeah, it's difficult to not share your excitement. So obviously I work in BI and data consulting, so it's also a professional services firm, the same as a law firm, even though what we do is very different. But in any professional services business, human capital is your primary asset, right? We're
Yeah.
not off like buying land or equipment or things like that. You find the best people to get onto your team, and then you're selling their time and their expertise. And so even when you were talking about that, it's like, wow, I just start thinking about all the value in that. Okay, well, what if we start using that people information and the competency information that we have to determine something very simple like, oh, okay, well, how are we going to upskill them? But then taking it to the next level. Okay, well, what's the number one thing that matters for professional services, sales, and marketing? Establishing trust. What establishes trust? Having experience, filling that niche. So putting the right marketing and sales opportunities in front of the right people. It's just like you talked about. When you take the time to really understand something like that, so many more opportunities and clarity get provided to the business. And it's really, really exciting. I want to circle back to another thing that you mentioned because I think there's some meat on the bone there. When you were starting to talk about people data and the security that's there, this is obviously a concept that extends outside of people management. There are, we can talk about healthcare data or, you know, uh, high level aggregated financial data, whatever the case may be. There are areas within data where data is much more sensitive than
Yeah.
others. Obviously, there are security professionals that are uniquely skilled in this area. We should either have or consult with people in this space to figure out industry best practice, to have their expertise, all that stuff. However, I wanted to ask you, and you mentioned like, hey, keep your lips zipped. That's
Yeah.
good starting advice. But for a data professional, someone who's not a security professional, what are some pieces of advice that you would give to that data professional about how to think about security and how to incorporate that into their not security primary job?
I would say the first one is don't assume you know. Even I've been at this for, oh boy, now we're going on 35 years I've been working.
Yeah.
And I know security pretty good. I still defer to my CISO for
Yeah.
advice on what we want to do. I know what data is likely to be secure or needing to be secure, but I still, because the CISO keeps track with, well, what else are they using to attack? What else could be, or what combinations of seemingly benign things can turn into a problem. The other thing I would say is that you assume everything is hypersensitive, and you make sure you don't store things local on your machine. You know, because it's as simple as you forgot to lock your keyboard, somebody walks by with a thumb drive, grabs your spreadsheet that you had up. It's those things. Just assume everything is hypersensitive. Don't be paranoid, but assume you don't know everything. Assume that everything is hypersensitive, and over time you'll develop, where, what areas you have a little bit of leeway in. But I think that's just the foundation, because even things you don't think are sensitive could be hypersensitive. I could say, I know the specific volumes being processed by one of our facilities. On the face, that may not be particularly, oh, so what? Who would care? Well, one of our competitors might care. What if they were thinking of opening a competing facility in one of those areas and wanted to know what the market opportunity was? Yeah, it's something so benign as that. So just assume that it's all to be kept quiet, and that even internally, don't talk. If there's something specific that has to be done, it's part of an initiative. But it's really about just keeping your lips shut.
Yeah. Yeah. It makes me think of, I would argue, like one of the more publicly aware types of data sharing that was a really big deal. So, like fitness tracking and things like that, anybody who's working out, you can see like, oh yeah, this is like defaulting to publicly sharing. My friends can see where I'm working out, like, hey, nice ride over here, whatever the case may be. But the unintended consequence of that was folks who were in the military who were like wearing their fitness tracker to stay healthy and do all that stuff ended up sharing layouts of military installations because
Yeah.
they were sharing their location data as they walked around. It's like, hey, why are there all of these people walking around this exact same pattern out in some remote location?
Yeah, and you can figure those things out. The other thing is, I've got 3 daughters, all of them turn it off.
Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
joggers, they exercise. It's like, because, oh, well, there's, some young lady running around. It's like, why would you want to advertise where you are?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that advice extends beyond just data professionals. That's good advice for anybody, is kind of being aware of what data you're generating and how it's shared and be thoughtful about that.
Right. Right, because everybody generates data. I mean, they when you start throwing everything up on social media and all of that, you're telling quite a story. And it can be fun. I'm sure, my wife loves her Facebook, but it's can also be, a little too revealing and share things that may not want to be shared. I'll give a horrible example. My oldest daughter learned of my father's death because my siblings posted it on Facebook. We hadn't told her yet. That morning,
Yeah.
they put it up on Facebook. It's like, "Wait, I haven't even called my daughter yet. She was at school."
Yeah. Yeah. So we've already talked a little bit here about some of the things that are hard, but I want to open it up a little bit. Talk to me about things in the field right now that are the current challenges that are difficult, and what are some of the things that you're doing to meet those challenges?
So, I think the things that I'm finding as the current challenges, we've had success with the data program, with the methodology and the approach I told you. And I'm regularly questioned is, "So, do we have all the data?"
Mm,
And that it's not the question itself, it's the lack of understanding of all the data is a very broad statement. All the data for what purpose and how do you define all the data? Because I might just tell you, sure, we have all the data as I define all the data, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's all the data you need. So that having those discussions and getting our business partners educated to be a partner, not a not a toddler waiting to be fed is
mm,
is it's a difficult journey because you need to sit down and say, okay, I need you to have the discipline and the maturity to take the time to say, what do I really need? And communicate that back in a way that is actionable so that we can actually do something about it. Just saying, I want food. Okay, well, we have mashed potatoes. Well, I don't like mashed potatoes. We have string beans. I don't like string beans. What do you want? Food. So that you see the cycle, and that happens every place I go. It's, do we have everything? Well, I can't anticipate every need, and trying to have everything is not realistic or actionable. You can't possibly have everything all the time. It just doesn't exist in your house. You can't watch every movie you ever thought you'd want to watch, no matter what streaming services you want, because they're not
yeah.
always there. So make them have that, and force that discussion saying, okay, when you say, do you mean, and what specific fields do you want? And it usually winds up on them going away and doing some thinking and then coming back, and you can have a more actionable discussion.
What about AI?
Love it. Um, AI is AI is a tool,
Mhm.
um, just like any other technology. It is something that is basically go transitioning from something that was being pushed to something that is uh, creating the demand for the data. Uh, and while it is a tool, it has an insatiable appetite, if used right, to help create insights and actions at a faster pace than ever before. The challenge with it is that I don't think it's well understood. I think people, when they think AI, think it's a magic bullet, and it's not. Um,
Yeah.
it's I anybody who's used Copilot and said, "Okay, I want you to create me a PowerPoint presentation that does X." Your answer is that it comes back with is usually, "I can't do that, but I can help you recommend a design template," that kind of thing. Um, but it is getting there. It is getting there. We've stood up an AI entity here that's getting pretty smart. Um, and actually a little comical. Some of my some of my guys come into my office once in a while and say, "It's getting a little spooky," because it keeps learning as it talks to people more and more. Um, and so, but it's the idea is that AI is meant to. I think AI is going to be an enabler and an augmentation of people, not necessarily a replacement. And that's not to say some jobs won't go away. They will, just like
Mm,
with the other when factories got automated or anything else, that will happen. But people were not always meant to do certain jobs anyway. And people need to evolve into more creative and contributory things. I think AI is going to help us solve problems that were previously too hard to solve. Things around how do we deal with pollution and energy and, and more sustainable living and come up with better things. But it's 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 going to be a little while to get there. But I think people need to embrace it. I think they need to I think they need to question it and teach it as if it were an intern or a you know, because you don't trust that it's giving you the right answers. I mean, some people use different terms like hallucinating, or even outright lying. That's a new term, and I've witnessed that myself. It will
mhm.
when it doesn't know, it will do what people often do: try to fill in the gaps so you think it knows, and it can be very convincing. I've had it come back with references to websites as where it got because I'll ask, "Where did you get this answer from?" It'll come back with references to websites, and knowing what I know, I check the websites. Some of them are make believe, and it gets a little interesting. So, you know, it will get there. It will get smart, but the fact that people created it, I think, is going to embed certain human flaws into it.
I'm gonna resist the urge to nerd out for the next 2 hours about AI with you. Um, but what I will say, distilling some of that out, is prior to the big kinda pre-trained transformer large language model revolution that ChatGPT kinda kicked off in the public's imagination, AI was still a thing. Even neural nets have been a thing for decades.
Yeah,
Um, but folks would talk a lot about, machine learning back in the day. "Oh, we wanna do machine learning." And the thing that I would frequently talk to them about is circling back to what we talked about a little while ago. Okay, well, what's the business problem we're trying to solve? Because machine learning isn't one thing. Machine learning is just a name, an umbrella name for dozens and dozens of different types of models and technologies. And AI, I would argue, is an even larger umbrella over, a even larger, set of classes of technology. And I think having at least a high level understanding, you don't have to understand all the computer science or the math or anything that goes into that to be an executive and to make good decisions around when should we use and what should we use. But I think, as you mentioned, talking about, like a chat agent, like some sort of the large language model. I think that a lot of folks don't actually understand what that technology does, which is essentially it takes a string of characters and then says, what is based on my training data, the next set of characters? It's all it does is
yeah.
it's just like generating text.
Mhm.
There's no concept of truthfulness or like real concepts of memory. Um, they've gotten a little bit better with the memory and a little bit better with the concept of attention. But it's just there are so many cognitive functions that are not built into any of this. Like we're not at generalized AI yet. It just
No.
takes a string of characters and says what's next. And it's really, really good at that task, but that is the task.
Yeah. It's the large language models, I think, make it easier for people to interact with machine learning.
Yeah.
Um, I think they don't stand on their own. There's That's why you're seeing a lot of people build out what they'll call um, compound agents,
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
to actually do the various tasks or provide specific bodies of knowledge that can be utilized to take action. But any one of these pieces on its own doesn't stand, and I love the machine learning discussion because had coming out of school as a statistician, it was marketing, but I was in marketing analytics. People always said, "Oh, you're the advertising guy." No, no, I do the number crunching. "Oh, good, you're hired." But, I look at the stuff that's going into these, and I'm like, "So you've basically put a 4 next loop on some math equations. Okay, that's machine learning. Got it, and
Yeah.
you're recording the weights and everything else." I think I remember doing this much more slowly and a much more limited basis on spreadsheets back in the '90s. It
Yeah.
just it wasn't automated, so we basically automated it. Okay, I get it. That works. But it's now we've just, accelerated it to the nth degree. Um,
Yeah.
but it will get there. I know OpenAI, claims that they've hit the AGI benchmark. I guess they were claiming 85% or 87% when 85% demonstrated AGI. And the pundits will say, we're gonna reach singularity in a few years. And singularity, by their definition, is where a machine can outthink people. It's like, well, my Texas Instruments calculator can outdo math for people too. That's being able to do things faster isn't necessarily replacing the people. I do think that, and I have a different definition of the singularity. The singularity is when the people can actually interact with the machines in such a way that it's natural and second nature. And I think you'll see the things like Neuralink and those types of technologies bring us closer to that.
Mm.
A little spooky because it sounds like the Matrix when he just uploads how to be a helicopter pilot, but
Yeah.
we're not far off from that when you look at micro learning and things like that. So if your mind can interact with a much broader common intelligence in some way, I think that's what singularity will be. But I don't think we're going to be there quite yet. I'm not sure we'll truly see it in my lifetime, but I think it'll get there. I think it's just inevitable.
Yeah. Circling back a little bit to data, but taking an idea from the AI discussion, I think everybody in the business world has a concept of kind of the economic theory of creative destruction. So something new comes out and it fundamentally changes the marketplace. Like some jobs die, new jobs get created. It's a fortunate and unfortunate reality of just the progression of the world and knowledge and marketplaces and all of that stuff. What I think the AI revolution can teach us about data, and hopefully more than just that, is we need to constantly now think about what is the value proposition of the thing that we're doing. What can we do better and differently? How do we differentiate ourselves from the machines, from our competitors, from the marketplace, whatever the case may be? And as technologies can take more and more of what they're good at off of our plate, I think it behooves us to redefine what can we be good at and what do
Hmm.
we bring to the table.
Yeah.
I think about, I see these posts on LinkedIn about how, kids in school are, hey, write a 500 word essay on this topic. And it's like, all right, well, that's something that GPT is going to be phenomenal at.
Yeah.
Is that really a skill that we need? Or should we transition those skills into like how to understand that, how to fact check it, how to do better research? Like you gave your example of, okay, well, I got some text generated. Well, I had the experience and the knowledge to be able to go in and understand which parts were true and which parts weren't. That's more valuable now. So
Yes.
I think it creates this, transition and, what are humans good for in the marketplace? And whether we're talking about AI or data with new technologies, that's kind of the constant thought. Like, what can we do to help?
Yeah. I think the other thing that's part of that is, the by some estimations, the the human population on this planet is expected to peak at around, I think, around 2050 or 2100. It is when the population is going to peak. And then the following 50 years, by some models, you'll see it drop off by several hundred million.
Wow.
And they're not saying due to some cataclysmic event or anything. It's none of this doomsday stuff. It's birth rates in developed economies are declining. And there's a variety of reasons. Some is, biological, health and things that people are having a harder time having children. Some of it's just preference.
Mhm.
And, you see that in Japan. Look, Japan's population is declining. Why does that matter? And this is why I think people need to get comfortable with AI and automation that comes from it, is that our population and our standard of living has depended on a pyramid where a young base of workers that outpaces the aging population can support the population that can no longer work. Now, what we're seeing is the population is living longer and the birth rate is declining. You're starting to see that base is no longer broader than the peak.
Yeah.
In fact, if this keeps happening by 2100, you're going to see an inverted pyramid. We have we have depended on a just in recent times in a ever increasing standard of living. I think back to what I grew up with, and I grew up in a nice upper middle class family. But boy, the things we have now, and I'm in the same income bracket I would say my father was in, that I don't think he would have dreamed of. The
Yeah.
number of cars you have, the number of things you have, the size of your homes, that can't continue if we don't have enough labor to keep that base going. And some of that's gonna be through immigration and all of that. But at the end of the day, if we don't have something to fill in and push that base back out and people are living longer, people won't necessarily be able to retire or afford to retire. Our standards of living will at a minimum start to stagnate instead of grow continuing to improve. And you're going to have you're just not going, your economy is not going to work the way it should. You need this to fill in the shortage of labor that is coming. You need this to happen. And I think people need to get comfortable with
This sounds like a problem for data analysts to solve.
it.
Charles, we got to spend a little bit more than half, but the first portion learning from you, I want to give our listeners a chance to learn about you. Outside of work, what makes you happy? What makes you tick?
Well, I love spending time with my family.
Yep.
My wife and my youngest daughter still lives at home. She has Down syndrome, and she's the light of our life. Um, we like to go to the beach a lot, and we go out regularly. We call ourselves the Three Musketeers.
I love it.
And I for hobbies, I rebuild engines for whether they be on my old tractors or I work on my motorcycles. I'm an avid firearms enthusiast. I build them, collect them, shoot them. Even my youngest daughter goes with me shooting, and love spending time just working in the yard, just taking care of things, fixing things around the house. I think I'm setting myself up to be the perfect retired guy someday.
I love it. If anybody likes what you've had to say, has a question, wants to reach out and learn more, what's the best place to connect with you?
Connect with me on LinkedIn. That's the only social media I have. It's just Charles Link on LinkedIn. You'll find me at that, and I with ReWorld. That's probably the best way to connect with me.
I love it. Charles, you mentioned I guess we both mentioned, right, kind of the breadth and depth of your experience. I can't thank you enough for taking an hour here today to share that with me and share that with our listeners. This was an incredible conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time to do it.
Well, thank you. I really enjoyed our conversation. I love talking about this stuff. I'm passionate about it.
Same. Yeah, I love it. To the listeners, especially if you made it this far, thank you so much for listening and listening all the way. If you liked it, if you like what Charles or I had to say today, please make sure to tell a friend, give us a like, a subscribe, a review, hopefully a good one. They really help keep the engine going and they help, spread the podcast to new folks. So thanks for listening and please make sure to do that. Charles, I want to thank you again. This has been such a pleasure. And this has been another exciting episode of the Making Better Decisions podcast. That's a wrap for today's episode of Making Better Decisions. For show notes and more, visit makingbetterdecisions.live. A special thank you to our sponsor, Canopy Analytic. Canopy Analytic is a boutique consultancy focused on business intelligence and data engineering. They help companies make better decisions using data. For more information, visit canopyanalytic.com. There's a better way. Let's find it together and make better decisions. Thank you so much for listening. We'll catch you next week. Peace.